whatever the government strategy, after 10 years, it should start saying, where are the jobs that we were promised? Our need for jobs. China still has a lot of workers in rural areas. I have questions for the government. You announced 3 schemes last year. What has happened to those schemes? We don't necessarily need many more new colleges. We need existing colleges to improve their quality significantly. How much demand is there for the IITs? How much demand is there for the medical colleges? So much demand that we send students across the world to complete degrees, and then it turns out the Indian education is better than what they got, so they don't pass the medical exam when they come back here. People aren't listening as much to the opposition as they should, because really this is slow burning crisis.
Hello and welcome to this very important conversation with Dr. Raghuram Rajan, the Catherine Dussac Miller Distinguished Service Professor of Finance at the University of Chicago, Booth School of Business, former RBI Governor and author, possibly his first interview after the Union Budget 2025. Dr. Rajan, thank you so much for speaking to Brut.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Rajan, in one of your interviews at Davos at the World Economic Forum, you advised against reducing taxes in India and instead advised the government to do, and I quote, targeted investments in education, healthcare, and job creation to foster long-term prosperity. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, first, I think that budgets have to make hard decisions. As the finance minister recognized in her speech, there are some important priorities for India if it wants to become a Viksit Desh, which is that it has to invest in healthcare, it has to invest in education. And this is far beyond what is currently contemplated. For example, how many students do we have coming out from universities who haven't got really an adequate training? How much demand is there for the IITs? How much demand is there for the medical colleges? So much demand that we send students across the world to complete degrees, and then it turns out the Indian education is better than what they got, so they don't pass the medical exam when they come back here. I think all these are issues which suggest we need a lot of investment in our people. And yes, short term, it does mean taking away from other investment priorities, but longer term, this will stand us in good stead. Now, I think the government is right in recognizing that the middle class has been affected adversely by recent events. That I think that it is good that they're recognizing there is a K-shaped recovery, finally. But I think it's important also that at this point they figure out how they adjust budget priorities. Many in the middle class have jobs. What we are worried about is the people who don't have jobs, whose kids are at this point sort of educated, but looking around. Educated joblessness is amongst the youth is very high. So what are we going to do on these? I mean, I would be happy with a tax cut, but if you cut other expenditures to find some way to spend on these priorities, or if you even thought of other revenue raising which were on areas which were not so difficult.
If you look at the budget speech, it's almost a signal to India Inc., saying that, okay, the government has done its bit. It's now time for the industry to sort of jump in and do its bit, for the state governments to come in. If you look at the whole tourism, bit, that the government has done its bit, the central government, and it needs help from all of these quarters to be able to make sure that we get that growth in India. What are your views on that?
I mean, that's absolutely right. But you have to ask, why is that growth being held back, right? So, when you talk about revenue raising, we've cut corporate taxes to a fairly low level. And of course, corporations, especially the bigger ones, are making a lot of profits. So the question is, why aren't they investing more? Typically when you make a lot of money, you put more assets into the ground. Part of the answer is perhaps we've cut taxes too much there, and there is too little demand amongst the people, which is one reason this might be a balancing act. But again, I say you still need to invest in your people, which again, the budget speech talks about. but that means spending on people much more than allowed for in the budget speech. But also, I think there is a need for a vision. Investment happens when you have a vision of what is going to happen down the line because you're putting assets into the ground for 10, 15, 20 years. And so if you don't articulate a vision, every budget is 30 yojanas and 20 a cut here, a cut there, additional money here, additional money there, and there's no sort of strong continuity other than which I should commend the government for practicing fiscal restraint. Other than that, what is the vision that the government has? I mean, saying Viksit Bharat strongly many times from the rooftops is not a vision. That's a goal, an ultimate goal. But what path are we going to take to get there? And that I think needs to be more articulated, and the budget has to follow through on some of that. So, for example, in this budget, you raise some intermediate good tariffs, you decrease some intermediate good tariffs. I mean, what does this all amount to? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to protect? Are you trying to enable? And if you keep changing it without rhyme or reason, or rhyme or reason which is in the minds of the people doing it, then industry doesn't know. If somebody lobbies harder next time, maybe they get protection, and then my costs go up. I think this was what we tried to get away from in the early phase of liberalization, and industry was very felt liberated and wanted to make the kinds of investments that we needed. And I remember in the early 2000s, under the previous NDA regime, there's a sense that India were world beaters in manufacturing. There's nobody who could stand up against us. Our costs were fine. Our steel was produced at global prices, etc. Today, it's harder to find that sense of optimism amongst our industrialists. We need protection, we need this. That refrain has come back. And my sense is, I think, trying to address those issues, trying to level the playing field. I very much support the chief economic advisor's point about getting out of the way. But the way you get out of the way is not by setting up a committee which is going to give you a report in 1 year. I mean, have much more, have a sense of urgency. This is a huge problem for India if it's growing at 6 rather than 8 or 9, which is what it should be growing at. If you don't have that sense of urgency, that sense of vision, that sense of that we need to restore strong growth, we have a flourishing auto industry.
Right.
Right? Where is it on EVs? Yes, Tatas are making EVs and so on, but we're not exporting to the rest of the world. The rest of the world is scared of China. And China, we can't say that China got China and we were at different planes. I mean, we had that auto industry when China started moving towards EVs, but we didn't. And we did it in much smaller measure. So why did we lose the race on EVs? Now we're trying to catch up, but it's belated catch up. That is some soul searching that our industry has to do, that you can't keep saying government has to help us without actually moving on your own.
Which brings me to my next question. You mentioned China and there's Vietnam, of course. So it almost feels like the low skilled manufacturing race. I don't think India is anywhere close to in that race. We don't have the edge in it in terms of low skilled race. You mentioned EVs. That was one where now I think we should be making a push, or at least have begun to. Where do you see this in terms of the high skilled folks that we have in India? And do you really think that that's a race that we can win when it comes to becoming competitive in the manufacturing segment?
Well, first, I think we need to revisit the idea that manufacturing is necessary for significant job creation.
I think that's something this government has made clear in the last 10 years, that they want
It has
to
been completely unsuccessful at it.
and not services, which is.
If you look at the last 5 years, look at the data, forget big talk, look at the data. How many jobs have been created in manufacturing? It turns out around 10% of the total job creation. How many in services? 20%. Both are somewhat lower than our presence in those areas. So, in terms of job creation, where has the job creation been? In agriculture, 54%, and in construction, 17%. So the point here is that whatever the government strategy, after 10 years, it should start saying, where are the jobs that we were promised? And those jobs are simply not there in the data. Yeah, I know Tata say, oh, we're creating 60,000 jobs here, and somebody else will say we're creating so many jobs there. But when you add it up, our need for jobs is at the rate of around, if you think about it, about a million a month, more than a crore a year, and 10 crores over 10 years. What is a few lakhs, even if you say the whole PLI, 60 lakhs, compared to the 10, 12 crores we need over this time just to keep those people coming to the labor force employed, forget the employing those who never had work. I think the government has to wake up to the fact that we are in serious risk of losing out on the population dividend. If you look at labor's contribution to growth, it is actually falling behind, which it should not when we have so many young people coming to the labor force. Labor's share of growth should be increasing at this point because these are people going into productive jobs and creating more value. So I think the what we are missing out now, what I'm saying is it is not that we can't do any manufacturing. We should get all the manufacturing we can, but let us recognize that there are three forces against us. One is automation. That's happening everywhere. If you look at a cell phone assembly plant today, it's not employing workers soldering on the motherboard. The lowest quality plants do that. The high quality ones don't do that. It's machine after machine in India. So it's not creating that many jobs. And the jobs that are there are either very low skilled, take this package from this machine to that machine, or high skilled, which is you need to be able to repair the machine. So the low skilled, they want to automate away. Why do we need that person carrying the package? We'll get a conveyor belt or a robot to do it going forward. So we have to recognize even in India, automation is reducing the number of jobs in manufacturing. Second, protectionism against us. Everybody wants their own manufacturing industry. We're not the only ones. And when the West wants a manufacturing industry, who are we going to export to, right? It's going to be limited. And the third is that Vietnam and China are not leaving those places. Typically, what used to happen in Asia is that as you got more sophisticated, you used to move up in the manufacturing ladder and leave the low-skill manufacturing for others. China still has a lot of workers in rural areas that it needs to bring into manufacturing. In fact, China has lost more workers in manufacturing than Germany has. So China is also facing the brunt of automation, which means it will have many more workers for some time to come. The bottom line is not saying manufacturing pessimism. I would love our industrialists to get much more, invest much more, etc. But I'm saying let's be realistic and say that's not where the jobs are going to come from. Where are the jobs going to come from? I mean, high skilled services is the leading edge, is providing us a lot of revenues, but that's also not going to be where the jobs come from. How many IIM graduates can you have? How many IIT design, chip design engineers can you have? The bulk of the jobs will come from the, investing in skill building amongst the lower end. So I have a friend in Lucknow who says, I can't find a plumber. I can't find an electrician. There are very few capable people, and they charge an arm and a leg and never show up. Well, it's saying our towns need more services. Can we train more people to do that, to provide those kinds of services? That will be a reasonable job, a reasonable income, and it'll sort of feed each other into a good ecosystem. So in this, I have questions for the government. You announced 3 schemes last year. What has happened to those schemes? How have they been developed? How have they been rolled out? What is the job creation? The problem is we have no statistics other than what the government chooses to put out in a very, constrained fashion. So what we really need is scientific policy. I announced a scheme and I follow through on finding out whether it's working, how it's working, and then make adjustments if it's not working. We had a whole range of skill building policies announced by this government over the last 10 years. Clearly, they're not working.
Mm.
So even these new schemes, what are we doing to ensure they work? And this is where I would say organizations like Niti Aayog should be drawn in to do the kind of assessment, maybe even outsiders, so that you have some confidence that the assessments are unbiased. But let's try and see, are the government programs working? Because this is extremely important for the well-being of our people.
So investing in skill building, that's something that India needs, and that could be a way out in terms of creating those jobs that you're speaking about, Dr. Rajan. Just so that I understand the statistic that you shared with us, you're saying the maximum number of jobs creation in India have actually happened in agriculture in the last 10 years, not manufacturing, not services.
Last
So
5 years, I'm talking about
5 years.
last 5 years.
Last
Yeah.
5 years. So it would be safe to assess that more and more people are getting into agriculture, going
I
back
would
to
say
agriculture.
it's the lack of jobs, lack of job creation in manufacturing and services, which is causing them to, go into construction, which is a big employer. And interestingly, when the men go into construction, the women sort of go into the agricultural workforce more explicitly. I think that's what the data are suggesting. There are a lot of self-employed women in the agricultural workforce. This suggests they might be women who are sort of taking up when their male members in their family leave to go to construction.
I wanted to ask you on job creation, taking this ahead. Many countries are grappling with the same thing, with AI obviously coming in as well. My question to you is, as we move more and more towards protectionism, the world is getting more protectionist. We have AI which is coming in. In terms of, is there a lead that India can take when it comes to AI, and maybe have a different kind of jobs, be ready for the different kinds of jobs that may be coming in as far as AI is concerned, or is it too uncertain right now?
I don't think we can possibly target what kinds of jobs will be affected going forward. But I think the best way to prepare our people for that is to give them an education and a skill set, which one is reasonably flexible to change, and second, give them opportunities to retrain, retool if necessary, right? And that again means investing much more in the education skilling system, but also being aware of when it's not working and rejigging things accordingly. I would say the advent of AI actually makes everything much more important. And some people say, oh, services will not be that important when AI comes in. Maybe, but manufacturing also with robots are becoming much more effective. Manufacturing already has been in a long labor decline because of automation. The automation is only going to get better. So, I mean, basically, we have to recognize that all jobs are, under some degree of threat by automation. Whether the automation comes in the form of AI or in the form of robots. Sometimes they're pretty much the same thing. So I think what we need to do is just up the quality of our education. The good news is quantity we have. What we need is quality. So I would love to, have some understanding of how the state and center are going to help colleges improve their quality. We don't necessarily need many more new colleges. We need existing colleges to improve their quality significantly. Some of them need something as basic as a good science lab. One college I was working with wanted a spectrometer and to do the kind of science research that the faculty and the students wanted. A spectrometer is a costly instrument. And so you need a donor for that. Government is not funding that kind of thing. Now, I understand the National Research Foundation, that has been recently set up, is going to do some of this. But my sense is there's a little money which is spread over a huge number of needs. That's again an area where we have to be much more sensitive. I think, when I say vision, I want to couple it with what the chief economic advisor said. Vision doesn't mean you have to do everything.
Mm,
Vision means you set an outline for where you're going and then offer the necessary support in the places where it's critical. I don't think the government should decide where we're going on AI.
mm,
You can see even the Chinese government is sort of the entities it funded particularly strongly to do AI
mm,
are not DeepSeek, which seems to have come out of the blue as a
mm,
self-funded entity. We should allow for all possibilities. So I like the idea that for small and medium enterprises, the government might provide some AI infrastructure. In other words, graphic chips that they can run stuff on. But I don't think, the government should say this mission, that mission, something else, or we're going to favor these companies. It's that whole issue of choosing winners, which we've,
mm.
sometimes gone back to national champions, which, hasn't served us well in the past. And is something that could be worrisome going forward. I was at a meeting in Europe where the Tamil Nadu government was saying we can provide you 50 engineers at $1.2 million a year, 50 good engineers. I thought that was a great selling point, but we run out of good engineers quite fast. We need to create many more of them, many more doctors, many for our own needs as a country.
Right. Create competition, don't choose winners for that important human capital that we have. How do you see the US, India? I mean, we have a pretty big deficit, about $60 billion. How are you seeing that play out with all the tariff wars which are happening?
Well, it's unfortunate because the U.S. was, in the lead of countries pushing for openness in the past,
Mm,
and every so often it turns. It was very protectionist in the last part of the 19th century under McKinley and so on, and it's turning protectionist under this president. So far, not a huge change on the ground, but some possibilities that it will change. In fact, I think not possibilities, but almost surely we will have some tariffs levied. Part of the reason is this president believes that tariffs can be a source of revenue.
mm,
And that if he collects money on the tariffs, he can cut taxes elsewhere for his constituents. But he also believes quite firmly that if the US is running a deficit with some other country, it's basically because the other country is cheating.
mm.
Uh, and, there are always examples, as you know, motorcycles. What is the tariff we put on Harley Davidsons? That's become front and center. But I think that you combine the tariff as taxes with the tariff as leveling the playing field, and add a third ingredient that which hasn't shown up so far in a big way, which is that it also helps us keep our geopolitical rivals down. In this case, mainly China, and you get the rationale for a kind of tariff war over time. I mean, people say the president is swayed by, the stock market,
Mhm.
and clearly the stock market believed the tariff war would be waged in full. Uh, there might be some, it might swoon. It's already very, highly valued. But thus far, he has backed away. So people still think that this is a negotiating tactic. I think it's more simply because he's surrounded with people who really believe in tariffs, his economic advisors. I would not, um, for him, friendships are transactional. So we do make a big thing of our prime minister's friendship with the US president, and there may be some value to that, but I don't think that's going to protect us against tariffs if he suddenly takes a mind to it. Is it going to happen for sure? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows the mind of the U.S. president. It can be quite changeable. Maybe our prime minister can do a good job in selling him, on the idea that this doesn't make sense and India will make whatever sort of changes it needs. But it does require a strong selling job, and I hope he can do it.
My last question to you, Dr. Rajan, is on what do you see as the biggest risks in 2025 for India, for economies? What is your assessment?
For India, I have always said this, I'll say it again, the risk is complacency. The risk is saying, oh, we're growing at 6.5, we're the fastest growing economy in the G20, et cetera, which we've heard time and again, right? But I think that conceals the real issue, which is by every medium term measure, we're not doing enough. Even if you compare our growth with growth of countries like Korea or China at our stage of growth, it's certainly not up to snuff. It's way behind. And if we think of the fact that by about the mid 30s, the additions of young people to the labor force stop, that we start our population dividend sort of ends around that time. We have a window of about 10 years in which we need to do a huge amount. And it's always sort of satisfying to say, oh, we're doing fine. We're not. And it's not up to the leaders to say we're not, the government leaders to say we're not, because obviously they're going to push the idea that we're doing fine and we're doing wonderfully well. The opposition should, but I think people aren't listening as much to the opposition as they should, because really this is a slow burning crisis. So that's important to keep in mind. I think on the issue of the globe, I think the kind of policy uncertainty that is being spread around by the US government in a much bigger way than I said about India, we lift a tariff here, we put it down. It seems in the US, you play with tariffs. Every week, some other tariff comes in, somebody annoys you, you put a tariff on them. They didn't, offer you their territory, you put another tariff on them. This is a caricature, but maybe there's more method that goes on, but it does create a lot of uncertainty. And that, to my mind, is we had a pretty decent economy in the US. Much more feeble in Europe, and of course, an economy that is in some doldrums in China. But the hope was, to some extent, the U.S. economy would be strong enough to lift these other economies out. Yeah. But if the U.S. economy itself is going to be defeated by the kind of policy uncertainty that's being created, including on immigration, but also on tariffs, then I think we're in for a couple of bad years. Hopefully, as the business people surmise this is all negotiating tactics, but I hope the negotiations get done quickly, because otherwise it's creating a lot of uncertainty. Where would you invest today if you don't know if tariffs are going to go up by 25% or not? You wouldn't even invest in the US because you don't know that the foreign competitor who's better than you is going to be kept out by tariffs. If the tariffs were set and you said this is going to stay for the next 4 years, then maybe you have some incentive to invest. When you don't know that, it's very difficult to invest as a business person.
Uncertainty kills growth. Dr. Raghuram Rajan, thank you so much for speaking to Brut and underlining all those issues.
Thank you.